Back with us on the SportsMax Zone, the report commissioned by Cricket West Indies to examine the senior men's team's shocking exit from last year's T20 World Cup in Australia was made public on Thursday. The president of Cricket West Indies, Ricky Skerritt, hosted a press conference on Thursday afternoon where he discussed some of the findings of the report. He shared the platform with the chairman of the three-man panel which prepared the report, Justice Patrick Thompson Jr. The panel also included the ex-West Indies captain Brian Lara and the international cricket coach Mickey Arthur. We want to remind you, viewers, of what Justice Thompson said about the trust issues between players and management.
But this report wasn't directed at finding as a fact that transparency and accountability needed work. But insofar as the lack of trust by the players, I think it's just more a lack of trust and confidence. They may have felt, and I think we made it clear in the report, whether rightly or wrongly, that there's this inherent tension between employers and employee, and that is the nature of the trust. I cannot, of course, because these were confidential consultations, I cannot in this forum simply say player A or player B had a particular grouse with administrator X or Y. That would be wholly inappropriate. What I can say, though, is that it is the sort of tension that is inherent in any employer-employee relationship, and that sort of tension is magnified when you're in sports, and it's even more magnified in any sporting arena when your team loses. That really is all it boils down to.
Justice Patrick Thompson Jr. joins us now. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Mariah, I presume?
Yes.
Is that fine?
Yes.
All right.
So, Justice, we're going to pick up on that bite that we just played, and of course, it spoke about the relationship between the players and management, that trust issue. And that trust issue is no secret to us because, of course, we interview players on a day-to-day basis. We have conversations with them behind the scenes. And, you know, listening to you, of course, that is something that really, really stood out for me. But the basis of all of this is how do we bridge the gap? How do we ensure that, you know, this trust issue doesn't continue? Because it's some of the reasons why players, you know, tend to opt out of tours. You know, they go in the setup and they don't feel comfortable. So, you know, what's the plan for that?
Right. Well, I have to say that is one of the primary recommendations that we dealt with at the outset. We framed it, I think, and I'm just going to refer to the document to make sure I'm accurate. It is one of the short-term recommendations that is encompassed in recommendations 1 and 2. You need to find a squad of your 30 or 35 core players, and then you need to bring them together to bridge that gap. You need to have conversations and ongoing, and I emphasize ongoing and honest and frank conversations on both sides to ensure that you can, in fact, bridge that gap and repair trust. This relationship is just like any other relationship. Trust and confidence is central to that process. And I think Cricket West Indies and the players have a vested interest in ensuring that that trust and confidence is repaired and restored.
You speak about identifying a core, and I know the recommendations were made, of course, you know, the president, everybody, it has been made public. Did you put a timeline, you know, were there specifics as the time frame? Is it that we're going to start doing it as of tomorrow? You know, what's the timeline like?
Well, that's a matter for Cricket West Indies, but certainly for us, we thought it better to frame the recommendations into short, long, and medium term. And as a short-term recommendation, we set it out at 60 to 90 days. So that, in our view, respectful view, ought to happen within the next 90 days. Now, if it doesn't happen in the 90 days, I don't think it's the end of the world, because we accept that the players have a whole host of commitments all over the world. But the West Indies calendar, I think, might permit everyone to take stock and ensure the logistics of what we say ought to be an in-person meeting should and could take place, I would say, at least no later than 12 months before the 2024 World Cup in the West Indies.
Yeah, now this document is a lengthy one, about approximately 12 pages long, and of course various parts of it would have stood out to me. It's no secret Evan Lewis and Shimron Hetmyer, very, very talented players. When they have contributed for West Indies, they've done really well. One of the points coming down to the end of the document, both players didn't take part in the interviews. What happened?
I have to say, I mean, we tried our best efforts to engage with the players, but we have to also accept that the review took place at a very busy time of year for everyone. The players, all of them had commitments of some kind, whether personal or professional. And I think despite our best efforts, because it's not like we had a very long time, as it were, to put this report together. Mickey was straddling Australia, Sri Lanka, and the UK. Brian was in Australia and I believe in the UK. And of course, I have a day job that requires me to give it everything that I have. So that I suspect that despite our best efforts, we were not able to speak with everyone, but we certainly tried our level best to cover everyone.
Justice, good afternoon once again. So, having regard to this executive summary that has been published of the work of the panel, I'm very interested in short-term recommendation too, because so much germinates from the stated opinion here about the 3-day in-person meeting retreat with the core squad. I want to know, and here, let me say up front, because I have to put this in context. I am not one of those who believes that an exercise like the one you completed is futile, because people are saying, well, we know certain things already and we know what they've said, we've heard it before. I believe in, especially where failure has happened, for this specific instance to be examined to see what went wrong, to see what we can fix out of it. Because if not, how else are we going to improve? So I'm thanking the panel for the work that they've done, and thank you for your contribution. So you know where I'm coming from. So, but here's the thing. There are aspects which must be interrogated to see how it will work, to present to those who don't have access to you to ask you questions a reasonable picture of this recommendation, and if they in their own minds can see the common sense in it and see it actually benefiting West Indies cricket. And I put it like that to say, if it is that we are to have a core group of players, by what contractual link will they be tethered to Cricket West Indies? And how will Cricket West Indies even hope to give them a contract of a tenure and value that is at least equal to what they would have earned had they been able to go jobbing between T20 cricket leagues as they are able to now?
Right. Well, George, that's an excellent, and I have to say, multifaceted question, which I'm going to try and break down into smaller parts so I can answer you as fairly as I can. Let me deal with the latter part first. I think, and I can confirm that the report says the contracts are actually sorry, I want to make sure I have this right. The MOU with WIPA is up for review this year. So that is central to any discussions. Secondly, Cricket West Indies ought to be, if it's not already doing so, conducting a review of its contracts with the players. You'll note in the review that we mention the need for greater flexibility, because this sort of contractual relationship is simply, it's entertainment perhaps for me and you as fans, but it is a business and you have to ensure that you get value for money. So Cricket West Indies has to assess exactly what pie it has, if I could call it that, the money that it has to hand to pay players, and exactly how it is going to secure the players that will form its core squad. Once they are able to bridge that gap, then I think there needs to be some greater flexibility in the contractual structure, but that to me has to be the starting point. But you can't do any of those things until you know, for instance, who your core squad is heading into that 2024 World Cup. That's your starting point, as it were. And just to emphasize this point, there needs to be flexibility about earnings. That is to say, players and CWI have to have some give and take where those matters are concerned. I think that is the clear thing that is emerging from our review. There has to be a bridging of the gap between board expectations and player needs and vice versa. That only works if both sides are prepared to accept that they may not get all they want, but they agree to something that's mutually beneficial.
All right, hear you on that. All right, so if we move from that then, and I notice the report says that it is highly unlikely that someone will burst on the scene between saying no and 2024. Justice, I want to remind you, there are 11 months left in this year, and there are 5 months up to June next year. So that's 16 months. Now, you know, form goes like the wind. Yes, and there can be someone who's bubbling under the surface who could emerge in the way that Brandon King announced himself overnight sensation. A couple of the others who came. So I'm saying the 30 to 35, what you talk about give and take, but what give will there be on the part of Cricket West Indies, because this will be wholly and solely on them now, to relax the requirement for a player to have been in that original match of 30 to 35 and make accommodation for someone else who is out but who's showing the kind of form that would suggest they could be useful to the team. Is it the recommendation that they add that person to the 35, or is it that we say, okay, let's do a little bit of culling, a little bit of gardening to remove those who don't look as if they're up to scratch? What's the recommendation there?
Right. I think ultimately the recommendation is for flexibility. It would not make sense to shut the door on someone who is in prime form. And remember, this is an assessment of the players that we currently know and have in mind. So that it is only if some new player emerges, as it were, that no one could have foreseen was coming, then of course it would behoove the selectors and Cricket West Indies to have that flexibility to incorporate that person. Because it's very rare, George, for someone to emerge 16 months out before a World Cup and simply, unbeknownst to all and sundry, have the chops to make it into the squad and to make it as a player as part of the 11. That would be a surprising thing, but not an impossible thing. And I think Cricket West Indies are pragmatic enough, or they ought to be, to recognize that if such a person emerges, that person should definitely form the squad. I know you say the requirement, but of course, we didn't frame it as a mandatory requirement.
Yeah, it's a recommendation.
Pick a unit and work with that unit, and players may come in and go out as circumstances demand.
Yeah, I just felt it was important to clarify that, because based on how it read, the text of the executive summary, it would seem to a reasonable man as if you're saying that close the door to anybody to anybody else because nobody will emerge. So it was useful for you to clarify that. I'll take that.
Highly unlikely was my term as opposed to impossible.
All right. All right. Very well. The issue, I see the report, and I wondered if the report was going to go there, and the report did go there, of making, I don't want to say solutions, but suggesting prescriptive applications then to what has been ailing West Indies cricket for some time, because clearly the result of the performances at the T20 World Cup and the result were as a result of what has been ailing West Indies cricket for some time. So tell me some more about what you are recommending about how Cricket West Indies can get more out of those they have leading cricket administration in the various jurisdictions so that cricket can be strong there to make for a unified, stronger West Indies.
Right. That's a fair point, George. I have to say that as part of the consultations, we met with the CEOs of the territorial boards. 4 of the 6 CEOs were present. I'm not sure why the other 2 weren't able to be present.
And can you say which 2 absented themselves?
I cannot recall.
Hear you on that. No problem. I just tried. I knew you wouldn't say it, but I just tried. Go ahead.
Right. So that they made it clear that they see themselves, with some justification, as the engine room, as it were, of West Indies cricket, if I could put it that way. So that it is for them to drive that greater performance from the territorial boards. The CEOs are ultimately accountable, and I think in any organization, it must work top down, certainly for an organization like Cricket West Indies, with so many disparate parts spread out from Guyana to Jamaica. You have to be able to have a clear mandate from the top down, which is filtered through the director of cricket, the CEO of Cricket West Indies, down to the CEOs, who can then spread that philosophy, if I could put it that way,
yes,
through their varying territorial boards.
Yes. I want to ask you this one going up to the break, and I've stolen some time from my producer to just keep you with us a little bit more longer, Justice. The people watching the cricket say a large part of the reason for our abysmal showing was because Phil Simmons is a bad coach, unfit for purpose. Is that what you found?
No, that's an interesting question. I mean, it's a fun perspective, but certainly I will say that the players did not say or indicate anything that suggested that there were deficiencies with the coach or any of the coaches that were around the unit. And I don't think it was part of our mandate to definitively opine on good or bad coaching. I think, George, you follow sports and you'd appreciate that coaching at the elite level is more about man management than technical sort of upskilling, right?
Yes.
You're really just trying to get the best out of the players that you have. And to a man, the players certainly didn't indicate to us that Coach Simmons was a bad coach, or to be frank, or that Captain Puran was a bad captain. That sort of interaction, I don't think would have suited the purpose of this sort of review. We're doing a sort of holistic assessment as opposed to a targeted, well, let's see who we can point the finger at, which I have to say is a sad feature of Caribbean institutions generally. We have a culture of one-manism, and that leads to one-man blaming, if I could put it that way, when things go wrong.
Yeah. We love the superstar, the hero leading the whole pack, or the hero ruining it for the villain. The villain ruining it for everybody else. Stay where you are, Justice. Going to keep you a couple more minutes after this break. Thank you for your time. Hold on.